Alright, Gamer Bears, it is time for a new subscriber special and tier list video, and today we have Gigantamax forms that we're going to be looking at today, and my opinions on each form and the moves that they have. So before we begin this, thank you everybody for helping me reach 950 subscribers, and here's to the last 50 that we need for the big 1K. So, a few ground rules before we start. We have tiers from S all the way down to F tier, with an E tier there, because I don't know why more people don't use E tiers, but I like to use E tiers. And the closer the Pokemon I have at each tier is, the stronger my opinion of them in said tier. So, say I put Venusaur in S tier, but then I have Meowth in the lower end of S tier. I like Venusaur just a bit more compared to them, despite both of them being in S tier. So, we're going to look at the Pokemon's designs, as well as the G-Max move that they have together. So, without further ado, let us begin, and also, like, would you prefer using this form or the Dynamax form? I'd look at that as well. But anyways, let us begin, starting off with G-Max Venusaur, and I prefer Ultimate Venusaur or Mega Venusaur, personally, because the Giant Flower, I mean, it looks alright, I guess. And its max move being G-Max Vine Lash, which I think is pretty cool, I guess. It's just I wish that, I don't know, the Giant Flower does look a little off, I guess, and especially the giant green eyes, almost like he's slightly high or something. And between this and just using Dynamax Venusaur, honestly depends on what you're more worried on. Like, do you want the passive healing of grassy terrain, or do you want the residual damage of G-Max Vine Lash against everything that isn't a grass type? I prefer the G-Max form, I think, just a bit more. If it was designed a little bit differently, maybe it could have looked more like a flowerish jungle than it just having a giant flower dome on its head. Then maybe I put it in like A tier, but otherwise I'm gonna put it in B tier. Now G-Max Charizard, probably the best G-Max form in the game. Well, one of the best ones. Design-wise, I think the flaming wings are pretty freaking cool. That's really awesome. And plus, its move G-Max Wildfire is basically just a fire-type version of Vine Lash, but deals fire-type damage instead of grass-type damage and hits all non-fire types. Plus, using this or the normal form, and again, it kind of just depends on what you want more of. I'd say overall the residual damage is more useful when you could have another Pokemon set up with Sun, like say Ninetales, for example, Cantonia Ninetales, for that extra damage. I think that would be a decent partner for that, so I think I prefer the G-Max form between them. Alright, Ultimate Blastoise. Or did I say Ultimate Blastoise? G-Max Blastoise. I'm putting A tier. I kind of like some other turtle Pokemon like Tornado or other non-turtle Pokemon like Ultimate Mawile. It has its back turns to you because it's so cool I don't even need to look at you while it beats you up. But I kind of like how its shell kind of just turns into one of those battleships and gets a bunch of cannons on it. Honestly, I think it's better than its Mega Evolution. Sure, the one giant cannon looks very powerful, but multiple separate cannons that can shoot from any angle is actually really, really sick, I'd say. So between this or the G-Max form, just like with Charizard, just set up Rain beforehand to get extra damage on your water type moves, and you get pretty much the best of both worlds, the residual damage and the added boosted initial damage. Alright, G-Max Butterfree. Not much different compared to the normal Butterfree. Its wings are a bit different, and its G-Max move being G-Max Befuddle, which will be later replicated by Sneasler's Dire Claw, excuse me, where it has a chance of, well, it's guaranteed chance, it's not just a chance, to either put the opponent poisoned, to make them poisoned, put them to sleep, or paralyze them. So, I mean, it's a pretty neat secondary effect, but then again, it's Butterfree. Butterfree's kind of weak and isn't going to really do much damage. So, I like the idea behind it, but I'm going to put an E tier for eh. Alright, G-Max Pikachu. Other than this really funny cry of P. And hey, it's Fat Pikachu. What could you not like about that? That's kind of funny, actually, being based on Pikachu's original design back in the Gen 1 games. But let's go back to Butterfree for a split second, actually. Between this and the Dynamax form, I just prefer using this since Guaranteed Status Effect is more useful than Guaranteed Stat Drop, I think. Depending on the scenario. But back to Pikachu. G-Max Volt Crash, I believe it's its max move. And I believe that always paralyzes anything that isn't an electric or ground type, which is very useful. Like, definitely gives you the certain Z move that, or max move that you want, unlike Butterfree's max move. So, if you specifically need paralysis, that's good, but then again, it's on Pikachu. Well, you could run it, actually, you could run it with Light Ball, so you know what, never mind what I just said. It being on Pikachu actually helps in that, right, for double damage. So, if you choose to use it for that, And plus, the added HP will certainly help you take a few more attacks than normal Pikachu ever could. So, you know, get some use out of that. But I'm going to keep him in D tier. Alright, G-Max Meowth, other than the fact that he gives you that money, I'm going to kind of put him in F tier. I like its max move and the fact that it gives you money, but it's just Meowth, but really, really long, which is supposed to be based on one of those Japanese, like, Lucky Cats or whatever. You remember, y'all know those Lucky Cat statues, right? I believe that's what Meowth is based on. But again, unlike Pikachu, Meowth doesn't have a specific item it can ult to make it stronger, so it kind of just falls flat there. And I guess it's just better for when you're doing playthroughs and you want to grind money. I guess it's useful for that, but otherwise, F tier just because it doesn't have much else going on for it. But we do like money. And between this and the normal form, obviously use this just for the extra cash. Though you can't really do that in competitive play since you don't earn money in competitive battles. So in a competitive battle, yeah, just use a normal Meowth, or, you know, use a normal type that has max strike, which is a pretty decent max move. Whatever. And going back to Pikachu again for a split second, I keep forgetting this. I think I prefer Electric Terrain, honestly. Set up Electric Terrain beforehand, because you really want to use Pincurchin. I'm just saying, but yeah. Alright, G-Max Machamp. I'm putting it S tier. This guy looks so cool. His max move isn't that useful. I'd say use Max Knuckle over Max G-Strike. Or G-Max G-Strike, because having your attack raised, or having your critical hit raised, or critical hit chance raised, means you're doing more damage more often with Max Knuckle than you are G-Max G-Strike. Plus, G-Max G-Strike still has the same limitation that Max Knuckle has, and only being about base 80, base 90 power compared to other max moves. So it does still have that drawback, so it's just better to keep raising your attack stat over and over again, I think. Other than that, I really like his design. Like, it kind of looks like if Forearms were a Pokemon. I mean, normal Machamp already was kind of like that, but it's like a Machamp and a Forearms from Ben 10 fused, you know? Or, forgot what the hell their species name was called. But, yeah. And I like how in his Pokedex entries it states how his giant fists are like Bomb Blast. That is crazy. Like, you don't want to mess with this giant guy. But anyways, he's going to go in lower S tier. I wouldn't exactly use it in battle, but I do like his design and its concept. Alright, G-Max Gengar. I like how its max move is kind of a homage to Ultimate Gengar with Shadow Tag. So I'm gonna... And I kind of like how it's kind of a giant funhouse. I'm gonna put it in low A tier. The thing is, Trapping Effect, it causes a singular move to do that, instead of... And it could wear off even. And you can't really use it again unlike... After the 3 turns is up, that is. Like Perish Song. Or, you know, a passive ability in Shadow Tag. And I'm pretty sure Ghost types are still immune to that effect, so it gets slight minus points for that. The shiny coloration, just like its ultimate form, is really, really nice. The whitish pink color is always really good, too. So between this and normal Gengar, I prefer using normal Gengar. Since G-Max Phantasm lowering defense, especially in doubles, could pair well with another slower partner that can do physical damage to said opponent after the defense has been halved, or not halved, but lowered. Alright, G-Max Kingler. I'm gonna say it outright, I really like the giant Santa Claus mustache/beard made out of bubbles. That's really creative. That was max effect just lowers your speed by 2 stages, which is useful, but Kingler's already a pretty slow Pokemon, so I don't think you're gonna get too many good uses out of that. Between this and Kingler's another one of those, what do you prefer? Having Rain for weather control or to boost your water type damage? Or slowing down your opponents. But I think slowing down your opponents overall is more useful, and again, you could set up Rain later on with a Rain setter like Politoed. You could always do something like that, but I really like the giant Santa beard. So I'm going to put it in high A tier. I wish his max move was a little more useful, and if Kingler was a bit faster, I'd put it in S tier. Alright, G-Max Lapras. Alright, G-Max Resonance is literally Aurora Veil, but you don't need Hail to be set up for it to be used, and later on, Snow. Even though in the current generation, G-Max doesn't exist, but I'm going to still say that anyways. And I like how it's a giant kind of water ship that ferries people across massive bodies of water, which the base form Lapras could already do, but this one does it on a much greater scale. And the fact that G-Max Resonance is such a useful move, it won't do a lot of damage since Lapras isn't the greatest damage dealer, though it is an ice type move. So between that, and you know how strong Ice is offensively, but between that or G-Max Hailstorm, or Max Hailstorm, excuse me, I think this is a much more useful effect than setting up Hail. Because on one hand, you could already set up Hail with something like a Bomb of Snow or Aurorus if you want to. But on the other hand, you can set up an Auroraville without the need of hail. That's extremely useful. So I'd say stick with the G-Max form for this, which definitely gives it some plus points. Alright, G-Max Eevee. Design-wise, adorable as all hell, but battle-wise, honestly kind of worthless. G-Max Cuddlefly, I think it was called, I don't know. Which will give the opponent the infatuation status effect. However, it only works on a Pokemon that has the opposite gender to the user. So on Pokemon that are male, let's say just like a male Eevee, it's going to be completely useless and basically just max strike without the speed dropping effect. And again, it's on Eevee. Unlike its Z move back in Generation 7 Extreme Evo Boost, where that has a bunch of uses, and unlike Pikachu, who could run the Light Ball, Eevee can't really do anything else with it. I'm sure it can run Eevee Light, I guess take a few extra hits, but of all the status effects in Pokemon do you really want to attract your opponent? If you want to cause your opponent less chance to move, Paralysis is better, and will give them, and will have their speed as well, so just use that instead, I think. But because of that, just because of how cute it is, I'll put it in C tier, but it's really not the best in battle. Between this and the normal form, just use normal Max Eevee, I think. Just because if you really wanted to use Eevee Light Eevee for whatever reason, just stick with the normal form for Max Strike. Alright, G-Max Snorlax. Honestly, I find it absolutely comical that Snorlax just becomes like a mini park that people can actually walk on. I think that's funny. I'm putting him in A tier for that. But otherwise, between its normal max move and G-Max Replenish, I believe it's called, where any berry that it consumes, it'll bring back, I feel like that would be best used, like on the turn you use a berry, and then you Gigantamax right afterwards to bring it back. Like a Citrus Berry, for example, or a Lychee Berry. Though at that point, you're already... I mean, well, you can run it with Gluttony, and you end up using the Lychee Berry at 50% HP instead of 25% HP, so I can see that getting some use. So, I guess it's... Well, yeah, I think that one is overall better than Max Strike, since Snorlax is a slower Pokemon. So it's not going to really get the most use out of the speed drop. In doubles, though, I can see other partners getting that use. But overall, I think being able to replenish your berry is overall a better effect. Plus, I just like how Snorlax, in the previous generation, it runs after the opponent to flatten them with its exclusive Z move, but here, it just lays down. It spent all that time finally learning how to stand up as of the 3DS Pokemon game starting in X and Y, just to sit back down again, or this time lay down, unlike sitting down in its Gen 4 and 5 sprite, which I think is extremely funny. But otherwise, Snorlax, you get A tier. G-Max Garbodor. Fun fact about Gigantamax Garbodor, if you look at the back of its 3D model, it has a giant Master Ball on it. So that's pretty neat. But it's a giant heap of garbage. I prefer Max Ooze, personally, to raise your special attack as opposed to a G-Max Malloader, which will poison all non-poison or steel types. Okay, decently useful effect, but of all the volatile status effects of the 5 of them, poison is probably the least useful one, so honestly, if I wanted to put a status effect on someone, Paralysis or Burn is definitely going to be more useful. And the other two, for those who don't know, Sleep and Freeze. But a G-Max Malloader, I think, I think it does suffer from the same problem G-Max Cheat Strike does, where it has the same damage reduction that Max Ooze has, and having less attack power at only base 80/90, depending. And one small problem is Garbodor, you'd have to run it as a special attacker to get the special attack boost to get the maximum value out of Max Ooze's special attack. Even though Garbodor is more of a physical attacker in both its moveset and its stats. I mean, it's a giant heap of garbage, and its effect really isn't all that useful. I'm going to put it in low D tier. You know what, better yet? Yeah, just low D tier. Honestly, just because of the fact that it has a Master Ball on its back, which I think is pretty cool. But its secondary effect, not the best. Also, its eyes are weirdly purple. If G-Max Venusaur was high on something, friggin' G-Max Garbodor is definitely high on something too. And weirdly enough, the only Gen 5 Pokemon have a Gigantamax form. Every other Pokemon has a Gigantamax form with the exception of Garbodor and Melmetal. They're all generation... They're all either Gen 1 Pokemon or Gen 8 Pokemon. Garbodor's Gen 5 and Melmetal's Gen 7, so... I wonder what's with the favoritism there. It's just like with the Alolan forms where at least, like, every single one of them was a Kanto Pokemon. In this case, it's either Kantomons or Galarian Pokemon that have G-Max forms and just Garbodor and Melmetal. Melmetal I kind of understand being an exclusive mythical Pokemon you can only get in Pokemon Go, by the way. But Garbodor, I feel like the only reason Garbodor even has a Gigantamax form is for the Eliana boss fight. Since, you know, her team is supposed to evoke a story of, oh, hey, she's using fake beauty, and then her real self is extremely trash, which is why her ace is a Garbodor. Like, that's literally the only reason this even exists. If it wasn't for that boss fight, we wouldn't have this. Otherwise, Gigantamax Garbodor, low D tier. G-Max Melmetal. One thing is, Melmetal looks extremely top-heavy in this form. And unlike the base form, that looks a little more balanced throughout its body proportions, this one does look a little top-heavy. Like, you can't tell me that you could cut off this thing's legs and feet, and that could work as a Gigantamax form, and it's just floating with, like, electromagnetism or something. That would be pretty neat, I think. Other than that, I do like the gigantic fists that it has, and it kind of looks like it could shoot lasers out of its eyeball, unlike the base form. Actually, the base form could do that too, but this one looks more like it could do it. Same out of its little chest thing, this little hexanet chest it has. So I'm going to put it in high A tier, not exactly S tier, mainly because its secondary effect of G-Max Meltdown, giving you the Torment status effect, so you can't use the same move twice in a row, which I guess has some uses, but I prefer G-Max Steel, or Max Steel Spike to raise your defense, which pairs well with Body Press strats after your Gigantamax ends. So I'd say overall Max Steel Spike is more useful, so that's another thing keeping it from being an S tier. And other than the fact that you can only obtain this Melmetal through Pokemon Home events, which is really stupid. So if you transfer one of those from Pokemon Go, like I've done up to 3 times, by the way, you can't use the Max Soup on it. Which, by the way, isn't even in the base game, so... But anyways, can't even use the Max Soup on it to get its G-Max form. You have to get one specifically from that event, so it gets some minus points for that as well. But otherwise, G-Max Melmetal I think is pretty cool. But one other thing about it, doesn't anyone else think that his feet kind of looks like jelly-filled donuts? You know, these donuts are great. Jelly-filled are my favorite. Nothing beats a jelly-filled donut hat. Okay, I just had to point that out. Anyways, next up, G-Max Rillaboom, which wasn't even in the base game. Funny how Charizard... I know Charizard's basically Pokemon's poster child besides Pikachu and Mewtwo, but... How is it that Charizard gets a G-Max form first before the Galar starters do? Anyone else find that a little weird? Whatever. I kind of like how it becomes like a mini forest, or a mini wooded area, mini forest. And its entire body, like lower half of its body, kind of becomes a giant drum set. I think that's pretty cool. Plus G-Max Drum Solo, ignoring abilities like Sturdy or Disguise, for example, is a pretty useful secondary effect. So I do like its design and its practicality in battle. I'll put it in like mid-A tier. But between this or Grassy Surge, well, you're already a Rillaboom. If you have your secondary or your hidden ability, Grassy Surge, you already set up Grassy Terrain, and you already got the added damage from it, and as well as the passive healing. So it is better to stick with the G-Max form, I think, over the base form. Or the base Dynamax form. Alright, Gigantamax. Cinderace, which has little Clonoa ears. One of the best Namco franchises, besides Tales of, obviously, but yeah. Probably the second or third best Namco franchise. But slightly off topic. I'm gonna put it low S tier. The reason being is, I can't speak right now. Cinderace does not get any larger itself, but instead is walking on a giant fireball, which is pretty badass. And has a little bird on it as well, with a giant rabbit-ish face. Which is pretty cool, and the fact that when it shoots the giant fireball, it actually has a mind of its own, which causes it to not miss its opponents. Which, imagine getting hit by this giant son of a fireball. And then, again, it's the fire-type version of Rillaboom's signature G-Max move. But it also ignores the effect of abilities, I mean. Which, again, against abilities like Sturdy or Disguise can be very useful. And G-Max Fireball, not as cool of a name as G-Max Drum Solo, but still. Between this and the normal Cinderace, just set up Sun with the Ninetales to get the additional damage, I think. Get your positioning right and you're good with that. You don't really need to set up Sun, and you have the secondary effect of still ignoring things like Sturdy. Even though most Pokemon get Sturdy or Rock types, but then again, some are also part Steel type too, so you got some good damage on there. Alright, and next up, G-Max Inteleon. I'm gonna be honest here, The water rifle is kind of cool, but it's going to get some minus points from me. Quite a few minus points, in fact. And this is going to be a little disturbing, so a little disclaimer for that. But anybody else find it a little disturbing? Like, I've been saying this since the Sword and Shield DLC dropped back in 2020. Anyone else find it disturbing how Sobble starts out as a depressed little kid, then evolves into an emo lizard child that's trying way too hard to be cool, and then later becomes a confident sniper? Okay, seems kind of alright so far. But then said sniper has a rifle and becomes a shooter? I can't be the only one who finds that to be a little disturbing, right? Forget that. Just forget about that. Anyways, aside from that disturbing concept, I kind of like how it doesn't really get any bigger, it just gets longer with its tail, like its tail got extremely long and even stands on top of its tail, kind of like a whirlpool in the air, which I think is really cool. And it has this water gun sniper, or what am I call it? It's water gun rifle, let's just say. Which I think is really cool, and weirdly enough, put into a rated E game. Makes me wonder how that passed the censorships, but whatever. And its G-Max move, just like G-Max Fireball or G-Max Drum Soul or G-Max Hydro Snipe, water-type move that ignores the abilities of the opposing Pokemon. So, actually, I'd argue it has a bit more use. You know what? Just because of that secondary effect, I'm going to put it a little higher, like low D tier instead. Because, unlike the other ones, which, actually, yeah, I'll put it high D tier, because I'd say that's the most useful of the three of those, being able to ignore abilities. Because Cinderace can ignore Flash Fire. If you need to one-hit KO something with that, or something tries to switch in and they try to get a fire-type boost from that. Or Rillaboom can ignore Sap Sipper. However, Inteleon has a few more things it can ignore, not just one ability for each type. It can also ignore Water Absorb, Storm Drain. Yeah, Water Absorb and Storm Drain, which, yeah, it's just one other ability, but that hits way more Pokemon, like Gastrodon, for example, which makes for a good answer against that. But between this and its normal form, I stick with this form. Again, just set a brain with something like Politoed later on. One way I kind of wish G-Max forms worked is you could choose which G-Max form you'd have. Like, if you want to have a G-Max move for one other move of that type, and then you could have, say, Max Geyser for the other. Alright, for Inteleon, for example. Let's say Snipe Shot specifically turns into G-Max Hydro Snipe. While the normal form, any other water type move, like, say, Water Pulse, for example, could become Max Geyser. Which, I guess, that's probably the reason they didn't do that, because then what's the point of using the normal Dynamax form, then? Just always use the Gigantamax form for whichever effect you want. Though I kind of wish it turned out like how I mentioned instead. Alright, next up, G-Max Corviknight. Look, I love Corviknight, and a lot of people love Corviknight. I think he's cool. I think this max move, G-Max Wind Rage, cool name, useful effect in getting rid of both hazards and screens. But its design is so lackluster. I'm not going to put it in F tier. I'm going to put it... I was about to put it in E tier, but you know what? I'll put it in high D tier, because they don't really do much with its design. And between this and its normal form, just stick with Dynamax. Corviknight. Just G-Max Airstream Max Airstream is by far the best max move because of it raising your speed and doesn't have the damage drop that Max Ooze and Max Knuckle has. Like, it's just overall more useful than being able to get rid of hazards when you could just use normal defog, which, oh, by the way, Corviknight learned, so you could just stick with that. Plus, in the same generation where the heavy-duty boots were introduced, do you really need to take that out with a wind move? With G-Max Wind Rage? Just stick with G-Max Airstream. But another thing is, it's so lazy design-wise. I get it, the drones are really cool. The Red Ends design's real cool. Heck, the shiny, where the wings are yellow, or the little wing lights or whatever are yellow, looks pretty nice, but that's kind of all they did. It doesn't really change form. Corviknight just spreads out its wings more and whoop-de-doo, it has drones. Which, again, the drones are cool, don't get me wrong, but I wish they just did more of this design. Otherwise, it's not the best in battle compared to its normal Dynamax counterpart. And it really didn't do much with this design, so it's going to get a pretty low score from me. But then again, it's Corviknight, so it gets some points from that. And the drones are cool. Next up, G-Max Orbeez Hole. With its max move, G-Max Gravitas. Setting up Gravity. I prefer setting up Prankster Gravity with Male Meowstic personally, just to get it up faster, or Trick Room. Dust Collapse, I think, is better for that, so you get it more reliably, and you don't have to worry about setting up your Gigantamax for that. And you can use that for a more useful Dynamax. Plus, Orbeetle, while it has good defenses, it's pretty low HP. But since it's Dynamax, you do get the double HP. Orbeetle doesn't really hit all that hard either. So setting up Gravity, I guess, is alright, but as I mentioned before, I'd rather just use that separately. So I think, personally, I'd stick with maybe the Psychic type form. or its base Dynamax form for Psychic Surge, so you could pair with either male or female Indeedee for that. If you wanted to, you could. But that's another thing. This is more of, like, the gravity effect specifically out of Orbeetle is something that would benefit more of a partner in doubles than itself, because Orbeetle doesn't really learn any moves that have less accuracy than 100%, so you're not really getting much, use out of the gravity effect that you get from Gmax Gravitas. So for that reason, I'd just stick with the normal form to set up, so you have multiple ways to set up Psychic Turn if you have a team centered around it. Since Orbeetle's really not the best Gmax form, but design, like, in terms of battle, but design-wise, I like how it turns into a giant spaceship. That's pretty cool. Like, the base Orbeetle already looked like some sort of intergalactic ruler that rules over multiple galaxies. This is just the freaking UFO that said galaxy ruler happens to fly in space, which I think is real badass, so I'll give it high A tier, but if it was better in battle, it'd be S tier. Alright, Gmax Dreadnought. Being able to set up Stealth Rocks is pretty cool, in my opinion, but it'll be better done later with Cleaver and Stone Axe. And since Cleaver can do that without the need of a gimmick. Plus, it's just better to set up Rain first. I mean, if you want to, again, Politoed, and it pairs really, really well with Swift Swim as well. So you're even faster and get up the Hazard and Super. But after you get the Hazard set up once, that's it. You just lose your secondary effect. So, at least if your opponent tried to overwrite your weather, or if you overwrote your own weather with, say, Max Rockfall, you can pair it well with Max Geyser from base Dynamax Dreadnought. Then Dynamax Dreadnought kind of looks like it's trying to stand up, but at the same time, it's doing that little waddly animation where it looks like it can't stand up for long. It's about to end up sitting down again, or sitting on all fours again. Plus, if Melmetal looks top-heavy, Gmax Dreadnought looks bottom-heavy, if you will. Like, a little more at the bottom than there is at the top. Like, it's gonna fall over, like, maybe not fall over, but it looks like it doesn't have much balance on its body either, which gives it some minus points. So I'm gonna put it... I'll put it in, like, mid-D tier, just because there isn't really... Just because the normal max move, I think, is better and pairs better with its abilities. I mean, at least the shiny kind of looks like Bowser from Mario, right? Alright, Gmax. Colossal. I forgot his name for a split second. I kind of like the Giant Furnace and the fact that it's a giant volcano. I think that's really cool. And just like the Kanto starters, its max move is basically a rock-type version of their move, Gmax the Volcalith, which will cause 1/6 of the opponent's damage for 4 turns to all non-rock types, I believe. Which still is a useful effect, but Charizard's got the better type combo, I'd say, and overall better stats to really take advantage of that. Plus Charizard also, and the other starters as well, with this effect, have their starter moves Blast Burn, Hydro Cannon, and Frenzy Plant respectively, so you get the overall higher power level out of that. Which is something that Colossal just doesn't really have, and another reason you can pair it with Sun too for even more damage with Charizard. Which you can pair it with Sun as well. Actually, that doesn't affect Colossal because its max move is a rock-type move, so it doesn't really affect it. So it gets some minus points for that as well. So between this and the normal form, if you want those, it's another one of those. It depends on what you're really looking for. But I think the Gmax form is overall a bit better. You can always set up the weather separately with something else anyways. Like Tyranitar or Hippowdon. And again, it's got a really cool design. I like how the chest bed in the middle is a giant furnace, so that's pretty cool. I'll give it high A tier. Though I wish I had a little bit more going for a Battleizer, or else it would have pretty easily gotten S tier. Alright, we're going to just lump up both Gmax Flapple and Gmax Appleton in the same category here. Since they look the same. It's a Megalodios situation. Only this time, it's exactly the same. At least, Megalodios and Megalodios, their eyes were different, you know? And they got out of the little Mega Evolution cocoon a little differently. Here, they're exactly the same. Only Gmax Flapple lowers your evasion with Gmax Tart Apple, or whatever. And for Appleton, Gmax Sweet Apples, or Gmax Sweet Serenade, I think it was called. I don't remember, I'll be honest. I think it's the only max move I don't remember the name of. But anyways, and I think if I remember correctly, Appleton's heal status effects on your team, especially in doubles. So if your ally has a status effect like Poison, for example, it can heal afterwards, while Flapple lowers your evasion. Which I guess later on with Super Sweet Syrup, that ability that Dipplin and Hydrapple get is based on this. Flapple's max move. I do like his design, like a giant worm and a really syrupy / honey-like apple, which I think is pretty cool. Though it's just, their designs just couldn't be different. This looks closer to Flapple than it does Appleton too, so slight minus points for that. Between this and just using max overgrowth, you can always set up like a Rillaboom next to it for the grassy terrain plus the extra damage, so I think overall, Appleton's move is definitely more useful overall to heal status effects, because just lowering your evasion, like, unless you really, really like using overly inaccurate moves, I don't see that being too useful, and besides, that takes your Gigantamax to use. You really want to lower someone's evasion, just use Sweet Scent. I don't know. I just wish they were a little different from each other. They should have looked different. The Flapple and Appleton form. So, I do like the design overall. I wish they had better secondary effects. Appleton's secondary effect is definitely overall more useful, so I'll put it high B tier. But, actually, better yet, I do like the design. I really do, but you know what? We're going to put low C tier instead. Or high C tier instead. Just because it's just really lazy that they just designed the same form for the two different Pokemon. That's just why. Alright, G-Max Sandaconda. Alright, gets G-Max Sandblast, I believe it was called. Its signature move. Which, it induces the effect of Sand Tomb on the opponent, which means they can't switch out, and they take 1/16 of damage, of their max HP and damage, per turn for 5 turns, I believe. Just like the move Sand Tomb. So you basically do really big residual damage, trap your opponent in, and have the effect of Sand Tomb, instead of having to just set up Sand Tomb by itself, which is pretty damn useful, I think. And it pairs well with Sand Spit too, even though that's just a weaker Sand Stream, let's be honest. But yeah. Just a weaker Sand Stream, which is a little lame, honestly, but whatever. Alright, well, with that being said, I kind of like how it's a giant, like, sand twister. I think that's really cool in its design. And I kind of like how its nose kind of, like, its two nostrils kind of resemble, like, a dual rifle. I think that looks pretty cool as well. Kind of looks like it could shoot sand out of those. Nasty, but cool at the same time. I'm going to put it in low A tier. I don't really use this G-Max form very often back in the Gen 8 days, but I do like this design and concept. And between using this or a normal Dynamax Anaconda, honestly, I think I prefer this for the residual damage and the trapping effect, which could be pretty useful. It doesn't even have to be an all-out damage dealer. You can just do it for the residual damage, which pairs well with the sand that you know you're going to be setting up. Our G-Max Toxtricity. This man is so cool. I'm going to put him in the high S tier. Like, this man will literally, and unlike the Flapple and Appleton form, these are both the low-key form and the amped form will Gigantamax into the same thing, which makes sense in my opinion. And a G-Max move, you either have a chance of getting your opponent will either get poisoned or paralyzed, which in Dynamax rates can be very useful, as well as in competitive play, being able to paralyze your opponent will be very useful, or poison them to get some KOs you otherwise wouldn't have gotten before. So it's got two different uses, though there will be situations where you'll prefer one outcome over the other, and you could be a little salty if you get the wrong outcome. Plus, I'm pretty sure its G-Max move, G-Max Stun Shock, is an electric type move too. So you can already set up electric terrain with, say, Prankster or Thunderous if you wanted to make its damage even greater. But you also have Max Ooze to pair with it. So boost your damage output even more with that, and then hit him with a G-Max Stun Shock. You can run a decently fast, Toxtricity as well if you wanted to. So I think in terms of its synergy with the rest of its max moves, Toxtricity is probably the best one. Plus, I love his giant little tongue. That looks really nice, even though or maybe not nice, but it looks kind of funny. That kind of makes it look like a Stitch cousin from Lilo and Stitch. And I do like the little electrical tower it's got on its back, too. That's a pretty nice touch. So between this and its normal form, I definitely use this one for the reasons I mentioned before, over Max Lightning. G-Max Toxtricity, you're a cool dude. Also, I like the lore behind it with the Darkest Day. Our G-Max Sense of Scorch, honestly kind of underwhelming, but its secondary effect is pretty decent. It basically, just like with Sandaconda, where it gives it the effect of a Sand Tomb, this will give you the effect of Fire Spin. So just trapping you in and doing 1/16 of your HP and damage. However, unlike Sandaconda, it doesn't have the sand to help it with that. So you won't have multiple forms of residual damage on your opponent, sadly. And it replaces your fire type moves, but I'd rather use this over the normal Sense of Scorch, using G-Max Sense Inferno. Because again, you can just set up Sun with something like Cantonian Ninetales to do even more damage if you'd like. Awful lot of rock weaknesses and water weaknesses on the team, yes, but still, you can always make a team around that. And I kind of just don't like how... Am I the one who thinks G-Max Scorch kind of looks like a giant fruit roll-up. That's what it looks like. And I think its form just looks a little too similar to the base Scorch form, which definitely gets it some minus points. Kind of similar to what Corviknight has, only maybe not as egregious as what they did with Corviknight. Cool concept, and I like its max moves, plus the name of its max move is neat. And I'd use this over the base form, I'd argue. But I'd have to, just because this design really isn't all that inspired, though I do like the hypnotic circles it has on its abdomen as well. I'm gonna put it, like high C tier. They could have done so much more with this design. Alright, G-Max Hatterene. Alright, its max move, might I say, probably has the best name of any of the max moves. G-Max Smite. I smite you where you stand, which will cause confusion. Definitely more useful than the attract status effect that Eevee can cause. Much more useful, in fact. Though at the same time, you could end up snapping out of confusion pretty quickly, too. Your opponent. And it's either this or Misty Terrain. I prefer this over Misty Terrain, I'd argue. Because having status effects against your opponent is pretty useful to do. Plus, again, you can just set a Misty Terrain with something like Tapu Fini, Galarian Weezing, or Prankster Whimsicott. So you can have both of... Actually, that doesn't really work, actually. You'd have to do different positioning for that to work, since, Misty Terrain gets rid of status effects. Or any potential status effects that could happen. Which can be useful for you, but can be detrimental against you if you try to use the effect. So you know what? Yeah, never mind. I think Misty Terrain is overall better, so yeah, let's just stick with the Dynamax form. Though G-Max Smite is really cool. And I kind of like how, his base form was already like this, but Hatterene kind of looking like the princess in the tower, even more so than its base form, and I think that's pretty cool. And as well as its long hair is kind of becoming little tendrils too, or giant tendrils in this case. It looks really cool when it uses moves like Max Mindstorm as well. So I'll put in high B tier for that. Alright, G-Max Grimmsnarl. Well, not the most useful move that it has. In G-Max Snooze, which, for the way this guy looks, that's such a very tame-sounding max move name. It should have been called G-Max Disaster or something, but nope. It gives you the yawn effect, your opponent the yawn effect, where if they stay in the next turn, they'll end up going to sleep, which I can kind of see its uses to force out switches. But at the same time, they really should have given it a better secondary effect. I'd rather just outright put my opponent to sleep, Something like Spore or Sleep Powder, instead of just giving them the yawn effect, or, just using yawn without having to use up my Z move. And either between this or normal Grimmsnarl, honestly, just stick with normal Grimmsnarl, I think. Because Max Darkness will lower the opponent's special defense, and that could pair well with another partner that's a special attacker, like, say, a Rotom, for example. Plus, Grimmsnarl's overall better for utility, thanks to Prankster. Though it could also be good for single target damage as well, so if you choose to use it that way, like I like to use it, it would be better to Gigantamax it. But aside from its practicality in battle, let's talk about its design for a bit. Because I've seen people, back when Sword and Shield first came out, say that Grimmsnarl kind of looks like a Kingdom Hearts villain, and I agree with them. It kind of looks like Darkseid from Kingdom Hearts, in some ways. And even looks like a not Final Fantasy, but a Phantasy Star villain, in my opinion, too. Kind of like Dark Force. From, like, the older Phantasy Star games. And you know who else it looks like? Looks like a Aku from Samurai Jack, which I think is really cool as well. Especially in its face. I wouldn't be surprised if Aku and Grimmsnarl are based on the same mythological creature. But other than that, I'm going to put it in... You know what? Yeah, I'm going to put it in high S tier. If it had a better max move, I'd put it above Charizard, honestly. So yeah, I'm going to put it in that high tier. I also like how it can change its legs into drills and kick holes into the ground. It's even shown in one of its animations too, which is really neat. Alright, next up, G-Max Alchemy. Probably the second cutest max form over G-Max Eevee. And it actually has a lot of really good uses. G-Max, I forgot what his max move was called. G-Max something. I don't remember what it was called. I gotta look that up later. But it's max move, or Grand Finale, that's what it's called. G-Max Grand Finale. I like how it can heal both you and your ally, which I think is pretty sick. Which is more reason why I'm putting it S tier. Also, cakes are awesome. I love cake. The sweetness of that dessert. And how it just stands on top of that cake. Minus points for no matter which alchemy form you use. They all Gigantamax into the same color scheme, which is kind of underwhelming, I guess. But then again, that's a lot of new 3D models they have to make. That's a lot of slight programming they have to put into as well, so I don't blame the devs for not taking that route. Would have been neat if they did, though. But instead, the different cake layers kind of represent the different forms of alchemy, which is pretty cool. And would I rather use this or the base Max Starfall? I'd definitely take G-Max Grand Finale. For the healing effect, healing, I believe, 50% of both your HP and your allies' HP and damage. Well, not in damage, but heals 50% of their HP. Which is basically Life Dew, but on steroids, and I really like that, and can do damage. Alchemy maybe isn't the biggest damage dealer, but I can see it. It can do some really good damage, some decent damage, plus heal you at the same time, which is always really nice. Like, screw Giga Drain or Drain Punch, just use G-Max Grand Finale. Plus, again, it's still adorable just sitting on top of that giant cake. Alchemy itself is already such an adorable Pokemon. But anyways, G-Max Copper Raja for G-Max Steel Surge, which I'm going to put, you know what? I'm going to put it high S tier mainly because of its max move. Its design is a little blockish and does look kind of dumb. And I do kind of like how its giant trunk is like a bulldozer of sorts. And plus, if y'all saw my Super Paper Mario playthrough, you know that I think this thing kind of looks like the Muth enemy. I wouldn't be surprised if it's partially based on the Muth enemy from Super Paper Mario. That's what I immediately thought when I first saw it back in 2019. When this game first came out. Sword and Shield first came out. But I like its max move a lot. G-Max Steel Surge, instead of raising your defense, it'll set up its own hazard called Steel Spikes, which is basically Steel-type Stealth Rocks. So, just like how Stealth Rocks will do Rock-type damage to opponents, if the opponent is weak to Rock, they'll take 25% of their HP in damage. If they're quad weak to Rock, like say Volcarona, for example, let's say half its HP will go down thanks to Stealth Rocks. If they're neutral, they only lose 12.5% of their HP. If they resist it, they only take 6.25% of their HP. And if they quad resist it, like Lucario or Escadrille, for example, they'll only take 375% damage. Very minimal damage. So in terms of this, with Steel Spikes, any Pokemon that's quad weak to Steel, like say Alolan Ninetales, for example, is going to take half their HP in damage. Anything that's only weak to it, like say Vanillix, will only take 25%. Neutral, so on and so forth, like I mentioned before, which I love this. That's like, it's kind of sad that unlike Komo's signature Z move in this game, and later on with hazard spreading moves, such as Stone Axe or Ceaseless Edge for Cleavor and Hisui and Samurott, will later have in Generation 9 and in Legends Arceus, that Carparaja didn't get a move like this in Scarlet and Violet. It's kind of weird how that didn't happen. I feel like it will at some point in a later game, but it's kind of strange that didn't happen. But this also gave me the idea of what if we had something like Stealth Sleet or Ice Spikes, which will have the same effect but Ice-type damage. Pokemon like Rayquaza and Dragonheart are not going to like that, I'll tell you that much. But I kind of hope something like that ends up being in a future game. But to kind of balance it out, you can only have one of the three on the field at a time, on your side, or either on your opponent's side of the field at the time. So you can't have both Stealth Rocks and Steel Spikes, or Ice Spikes and Steel Spikes. You have to have one of the three. And anytime, let's say, Stealth Rocks is set up over Steel Spikes, the Steel Spikes gets overridden by the Stealth Rocks. Balance it out a bit. Or you're going to have a lot of crazy hazard stacking effects, like, I remember seeing that in a video once where Frostmouth got absolutely decimated, which, I'm pretty sure Frostmouth is the only Pokemon that can get decimated in one go. If every current entry hazard is on the field at once, which is pretty crazy. I always wanted a paralysis version of Toxic Spike kind of too, that set up paralysis, or maybe a burn version of that called Burn Spikes, or Burning Trail or some garbage like that. But those I can see being kind of broken too. Well, the Burn Trail one I think would be pretty cool. I hope we see something like that, but the paralysis one would kind of be broken. But slightly off topic there, just more reasons why I put this thing in S tier. Plus, between that and Steel Spikes, easily choosing Steel Surge for that Steel-type hazard damage. That's actually really useful. But as G-Max Carparaja, aside from your slightly dumb-looking design, I'll put you in mid-S tier. Mid to low S tier. Alright, we're in the final stretch. Almost ending off with G-Max Duraludon. I do like how it looks like a giant building, but the fact that it got this G-Max form, but then later on it gets an evolution in Scarlet and Violet's DLC, and I prefer Archaludon over this for multiple reasons, is kind of some negative points against it, I'd say. Well, actually, you know what, never mind. Forget I just said that. I should follow my old rules like I said in my older tier lists about how we're going to pretend like any later evolutions don't exist. And the only G-Max form that really applies to is Duraludon, so just forget what I said about that before. But I do like its max move in G-Max Depletion, which gives you the Smite effect, where after your opponent uses a move, they'll lose 4 power points to that move, meaning they have less uses of it overall, which isn't the most useful effect, so I'd argue I'd overall go with Steel Spikes for this, which is going to get it some minus points for that. But I do like that it's based on the Empire State Building, I believe, from New York, which is a really nice inspiration, or some other really tall skyscraper. I don't remember which one particularly, but yes. And I like how it's shiny form. The windows are orange instead of blue, which shows like an evening sky, which is a really nice touch. But I prefer using the normal Dynamax Duraludon for this for defense boosts, and again pairs well with any body press strats you might want to do, especially since Duraludon is a pretty respectable base 115 defense stat. So yeah, gonna get some minor points for that, but I do like its concept quite a bit. I'm gonna put a high 8 here. Definitely better in battle than Orbeetle is, but Orbeetle just gets more points for design and concept. Both are cool concepts nonetheless, though. Alright, and here are the final two. Both Urshifu forms. Easy, I'm putting them both in S tier. You know what? Yeah, I'm gonna put I'll put the Rapid Strike form before Charizard, but the Single Strike form after Charizard. Call me edgy, but I love the Single Strike form a lot. I mean, sure, the secondary effects are pretty much just their abilities, but they go through Max Guard, which gives them some good use, and you know how much I hate protecting moves anyway, so anything that goes through that, I'm gonna instantly love. And G-Max, Rapid Flow, it goes through Max Guard, which is pretty useful, so you're pretty much guaranteed to get this move off. Though it doesn't have as many uses as Inteleon's G-Max Hydro Strike, or Hydro Snipe. I keep stuttering, sorry. It may not have nearly as many uses as that, but being able to go through Max Guard whenever you want to is always good, and plus, I'd use this form over the base Urshifu Rapid Strike form, for the purposes of, you can already set up Rain with something like Politoed, for example. Or Rain Dance Tornadus, which pairs pretty well with this, I think. And even the attack pairs well with Max Knuckle, so there's that too. Plus, I kind of like the giant wrathful, like the giant calming stance. Well, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Single Strike Urshifu has the more wrathful stance, while Rapid Strike Urshifu has the more calm and flowing kind of stance. It shows the incredible amounts of balance and skill it has in its little stance, standing on one foot, which is pretty damn cool. And I like how it can attack not multiple times, but it can do multi-striking maneuvers while standing on one foot too, which is pretty damn cool as well. And the white makes for a nice contrast with the blue in its design as well as the inevitable red as it being a Dynamax form, or Gigantamax form. So yes, Urshifu you get a really high placing, as well as I used those a lot in my old champion team that I made, well, before I started doing content creation. That definitely got me a lot of wins on the Battle Tower, as well as in competitive play. On the ladder. Not ranked ladder, but just on normal Wi-Fi battles. That I did back in Sun and Moon, or Sword and Shield, before I became a content creator doing these videos. And finally, G-Max, a Single Strike Urshifu. I love its signature move. G-Max Single Blow is such a cool move animation-wise. It just reels back his fist, throws a punch as hard as it possibly can, and just throws a giant beam at the opponent. Which basically acts as a, physical fist, which is so badass. That is so badass and so cool. Has the same effect as Rapid Strike Urshifu's max move, but is Dark type instead of Water type. So too bad I can't get any Water type damage boosts in the rain. I'd use this move over Max Darkness in the normal form, in its normal Dynamax form, simply because it's a physical attacker, not a special attacker, so the special defense drop really isn't going to be that useful. But just for the animation alone, I love G-Max Single Strike. It's such a raw, powerful, destructive animation, and I think that's super, 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 super cool. And even that animation, where it punches back the fist and a giant darkness beam of light kind of comes out of it, kind of reminds me of the single-hand Kamehameha Gohan you would do back in the Cell Saga of Dragon Ball Z, so that's another really cool thing with it as well. That being said, I love using this thing in battle. I love using Single Strike Urshifu, and if you've seen my previous tier list, I prefer this over the Rapid Strike form, and that range true for his Gigantamax form as well. And the red color, just like with the blue, contrasts really well with the white, and the other reds in the design make it look even more wrathful, like a wrathful god of some sorts, which gives it even more points in my eyes. So, Single Strike Urshifu G-Max form, you are my favorite Gigantamax form. With that being said, that is my tier list and all my opinions on the different Gigantamax forms on Pokemon Sword and Shield. What do y'all think of this list? Do you agree with some of my picks, or do you disagree with some of my picks? And answer the question of the day as usual for this type of video. What is your opinion on all of the different Gigantamax forms? If you'd like to make a tier list yourself in the comments, please do so. So if y'all enjoyed this and you want to see more, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And here's to when we hit the big 1,000 subscribers on this channel. Once again, thank you everybody for helping me hit 950 subs. Thank you all for watching. Have a terrific day. We'll have even more sub specials for the 1,000 sub special. See y'all then.